we've been friends for a long time, and contrary to a sort of mythology that has developed, I'm not among his closest friends by any means, or one of his sort of intimate advisors. But we are friends, and we periodically have lunch. And the story that I've written is an account of some things that he said over the course of a number of conversations, but one in particular, a lunch on March 27th in his office at the FBI.
I'm curious, why are you talking about this now? Why, given that he is a friend of yours, why are you talking about this, and does he know that you're talking about it?
I am in no sense talking at his behest. I'm talking about it because I read the New York Times story the other day that the president had asked for a loyalty oath from him. And that story put in, frankly, sharply menacing terms a set of comments and anecdotes that he had told me. And I saw them in light of that story very differently than the way I had seen them before.
Sharply menacing?
Yeah, I think so. And so I thought about it overnight on Thursday night, and I decided that the public should know about what he had told me.
Well, can you characterize, we'll go through some of the specifics, but what is it that Comey did tell you?
Well, the broad point is that he really spent an enormous amount of energy in the period in which both he and Trump were in office, trying to protect the FBI from political interference from the White House, and that this was a real preoccupation of his during this entire period of time. There were, so far we have had 2 incidents become public in which, or maybe 3, depending on how you count, in which there were contacts between the White House and the FBI on investigative matters that he regarded as inappropriate. I suppose the loyalty oath doesn't quite count as because it's in general, not about a specific investigation. But certainly the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus's communications with Deputy Director Andrew McCabe fit into that category. And the more recent story that broke this week about Trump's personally asking Comey to drop the matter involving General Flynn is an example of this. But my point is that the tone of our conversations was that this was a general preoccupation, and that Comey felt that the word he used was that the White House had to be trained to not engage in communications on investigative matters with the Bureau, that it had to be trained to only go through the Justice Department and not ask investigative questions at all, and that he saw his role, and he really saw it both in a future sense as well, as policing that line and reestablishing normal hands-off FBI White House communication. So he didn't tell me about any specific incidents, but
the specifics that we've known about now because of these leaks, the Flynn allegation, the loyalty oath, he didn't mention those specifics to you.
Correct. I mean, the story about Priebus and McCabe had already been published at the time, so that one was sort of known. But my assumption is that, again, without knowing this, but my assumption is that there may well be more such episodes, and that this was a general preoccupation of his that really was the dominant component of his relationship with certainly the president individually, but he saw his role as protecting the FBI from the White House.
Did you get the sense from your conversations with Comey that he felt the interference that he saw coming from the White House pertaining specifically to the Russia investigation?
So, look, we have never spoken about investigative matters. I don't it would be grossly inappropriate for me to ask him questions about investigative matters, and it would be grossly inappropriate of him to answer any such questions if I did ask them. So
you were not asking as a journalist.
So I wasn't there as a journalist, right? And I wasn't there with any idea that I would ever be talking about those conversations. So there's, any follow-up question that I might now have in my mind is a question I didn't ask. And so I only have the impressions from the casual conversations that we were having. So look, I assumed that one of the investigative materials that he was concerned about protecting was the Russia investigation. That was never said.
You described Comey's concerns as, quote, improper contacts and interferences from a group of people he, Comey, did not regard as honorable. What gave you that sense that he didn't view these people as honorable people?
It was written on every line in his face. It was evident in the disapproving tone that he took when he described them.
Including the president?
Oh, very much so. And it was, there was one incident in which he, said to me that this hashtag that I tweet under, Notes from Under Trump, where each one I say, Notes from Under Trump, day, 115.
The catalog of the presidency thus far.
Exactly. And he joked with me that ticker was moving awfully slowly. And he said repeatedly, it's going to be a very long few years. And this was somebody under intense pressure. And look, Jim is a trooper. He handles pressure very well. He's not a whiner. But the color of the wallpaper was that these were not honorable people, and that protecting the FBI from them was his day job.
Let's talk about some of the specifics that you write about the famous hug when Comey was asked to come with a bunch of other law enforcement agents to the White House soon after the inauguration. Can you tell us what Comey went through mentally that day? Yeah,
so Comey really did not want to go to that meeting. And there were a few components of that. One is he just really doesn't believe that the president and the FBI director should, have any kind of social relationship or shows of warmth. And he really believes in an arm's length relationship.
And this wasn't just with Trump. I understand that Comey also didn't want to, play basketball with President Obama. Correct. For the same reason.
So this is a general point. He believes that the White House should not ask investigative questions, and he believes he shouldn't be chummy with the president. And by the way, he admired Obama a great deal. This was not
wasn't animus towards Trump.
Or animus toward the president, any president. It is just his view of what the relationship should be. So he was reluctant to go. In addition, in this situation, there was an additional component, which is that he was very aware that a lot of Democrats blamed him for Trump's election.
For letting out this 11 days before the election that he was reopening the investigation into Clinton's email.
And for the July press conference and testimony in which he closed it. A lot of people have a lot of concerns about that, and there were a lot of Democrats who kind of blame him for Trump. So he was particularly sensitive to the idea of a sort of show of intimacy or closeness with Trump. That said, he didn't feel that he could say no to an invitation from the president, particularly one that went generally to law enforcement senior officials. This was an event designed to thank law enforcement for their roles in the inauguration, and he thought it was not even more inappropriate to not go. So he went, and it's actually a funny story. He really wanted to kind of blend in and not be singled out, and he's a he's 6'8", so it's when you're
kind of tough to do
when
that.
you're 6'8", it's really hard to blend in. He's wearing, if you watch room, that is as far from Trump as it is physically possible to be, and also against blue drapes that are the same color as his.
He chose that spot?
He chose that spot because it was, like almost like a chameleon, camouflaged
Blend
against
in.
the wall. So, he described, thinking he'd gotten away with it. And the meeting goes on. It went on a long time, and Trump had not singled him out. And then at the end, right at the end, Trump singles him out in a fashion that he regarded as sort of, calculated to maximally drive home this sensitivity among Democratic voters, which is to say, I forget the exact quote, hey, look, he's even more famous than I am. And at that
And sort of throwing his arms open to him and welcoming him over.
Exactly. So he has to go over and shake his hand.
He's become more famous than me.
And it's a long walk across that room. And what he told me was that it was bad enough that he was there. It was bad enough that there was going to be a handshake, but there really wasn't going to be a hug. And so if you watch the video, he extends his hand, and Comey's arms are really long, and he extends his hand kind of preemptively. And Trump grabs the hand and kind of pulls him into a hug. But the hug is entirely one-sided. So one guy in the hug is shaking hands, and the other guy is hugging. And Comey was just completely disgusted by the episode. He thought it was an intentional attempt to compromise him in public in a way that would sow and emphasize concerns that half of the electorate had about him and the Bureau. And this took place 5 days before the dinner at which the loyalty oath was requested. So, Comey was already, he felt he was, the president had kind of gone out of his way to compromise him, and then asked for a loyalty oath in a private dinner that he also didn't want to go to a number of days later. Now, I actually did not know anything about the dinner until I read it in the New York Times, but that was one of the reasons this incident was one of the reasons that I read that with kind of it was particularly acute for me.
With regards to some of the gestures that Comey reported to you, feeling that the president was trying to get chummy with him and bring him into his circle, could there be a charitable explanation that this is a political neophyte? He's never been in politics before. He may not truly appreciate the distinction between being the separation between presidency and the FBI, and he's simply trying to develop a relationship with the guy.
Well, so, the president described in his letter that, and subsequent statements, that Comey had told him 3 times that he wasn't under investigation.
This was the letter that was put out basically firing Comey.
Yes. And he described in 2 telephone calls in which Comey had supposedly told him. Now, Comey described to me at the time a phone conversation with the president.
This is before he was fired.
Yes. This was, this was at lunch on March 27th. And his account of the phone conversation, or at least this particular phone conversation, was peculiar. So he was about to get on a helicopter, and he gets a call from the White House that the president wants to speak to him. So he assumes there's an urgent matter of some kind. And he delays the helicopter flight and takes the call from the president. And to his surprise, there's no urgent matter at all. The president just wants to chit-chat. And he was bewildered by it. And again, thought it was quite inappropriate that, he doesn't think the president and the FBI director should be chit-chatting. He doesn't want that kind of a relationship with the president. But he interpreted it as an effort to kind of be chummy and kind of bring Comey into the fold. I hadn't known about the dinner meeting.
The loyalty oath
The
dinner.
loyalty oath dinner. But he had told me in general terms that the president is uncomfortable with me because he asked for loyalty, and I told him I could only give him honesty. And he interpreted this call as, he said, that the president has been uncomfortable with me ever since and has been, he tries to be chummy to try to kind of bring me in. And he interpreted this call as an example of that. And he told me about this call as an example of that. And he thought it was inappropriate. He thought it was weird. And he thought it was a reflection of the president's discomfort having asked for loyalty and not gotten it.
You also recount a story of when Rod Rosenstein, who is now the Deputy Attorney General, was being nominated or about to have his hearings, that you were surprised that Comey seemed less than excited with Rosenstein getting that appointment. Can you explain?
Well, so the background here is that, Rod Rosenstein is a respected career prosecutor who's been in government a long time and served in both the Bush and Obama administrations. So he's somebody who's crossed administration and has quite a good record and a good reputation. And when the last time I saw Jim at the FBI, he was. This was shortly before Rosenstein was confirmed, 2 or 3 weeks before Rosenstein was confirmed, and his confirmation at that point was a foregone conclusion. And I expressed to Jim that that's a good thing. At least you'll have a deputy. And I was rather surprised at how unenthusiastic Comey was that there was going to be a Senate-confirmed Deputy Attorney General who was Rod Rosenstein. And what he said was, I mean, this is my paraphrase, not a quotation, but he said, look, we do need a deputy, and that the acting deputy had done a fine job, but they really needed Senate-confirmed leadership to make important decisions. But that he had concerns about Rod, and what he specifically said was, and I'll never forget it, he said, Rod is a survivor.
Meaning he's lived through Democratic and Republican administrations.
Yeah, and you don't get to survive that long without making some compromises. And so he said, I have concerns. And I was very struck by that, and I didn't understand it. And I didn't understand it until I read that New York Times story about the loyalty oath dinner. And now, and this is just my interpretation, I think I do understand it. And I think what he was thinking at that moment was that if I was asked to give a loyalty oath, and the president has done these things to undermine me and to sort of bring me into the fold, what was he asked to do? And was there a dinner or something else where he was asked, and what did he say at that dinner? And that's,
for the record, there is no evidence that we know of any of that going on.
No. I don't even necessarily mean it in any literal sense.
But this is what was going through Comey's mind.
Well, I don't want to say what was going through Comey's mind because I don't know. I only know what he said. I think he was concerned that he had been asked to make compromises and he had refused. And I think he was concerned that Rod Rosenstein may have been asked to make compromises as well.
What do you make of the criticism that many people have made about Comey, that if all of these things were happening to you, if you were asked for a loyalty oath, if the president had approached you about dropping the Flynn investigation, if you felt like they were treading uncomfortably on your territory, why not blow the whistle? Why not quit? Why not raise more hell about this if it was so bad?
Well, so first of all, one possibility is that it was not so bad. that it was, and I actually think there's some evidence of this, that this was a situation that he thought he was going to have to manage, and that his job was to protect the Bureau and make sure it could do its work. And when I had lunch with him on the 27th of March, my impression was that he sort of thought he'd had the situation under control.
And that was all he needed to do.
That was his job, was to protect the Bureau so that it could do its work. And that that had taken a lot of work, and that he anticipated that it would continue to take a lot of work, and that he would have to throw more back pitches over time, and that the president might continue to make phone calls to him sometime and ask for kind of chumminesses that were uncomfortable for him personally, but that he could handle that. And I think he thought he had it under control. And look, each individual one of these incidents is an egregious impropriety. But they are much, much worse in light of the fact that we know that when he didn't get the loyalty oath from Comey, and these efforts to kind of bring him into the fold failed, that he then turned around and fired him. And so...
But if they are that egregious, as you say, why didn't Comey blow the whistle publicly, testify before Congress, or quit?
Well, look, I can't speak for him about any of that because I haven't, I'm telling you things that I've had conversations with him about and actually know, and I'm not going to make stuff up on his behalf. I'm certain that he wouldn't quit if he thought that the FBI needed somebody there to protect it institutionally. Why he chose to stay quiet about these things is something that somebody will have to ask him.
Have you talked to Jim Comey since he's been fired?
Yes.
Can you share what he said or how he's doing or whether he feels the Russia investigation, for instance, is going to go forward?
I don't want to discuss any conversations that we may have had beyond the ones I've chosen to talk about. I will say that, he's doing fine. He's, one thing that he is not is somebody who's going to spend a lot of time feeling sorry for himself about this. And I also think that, one reaction that people have when they've been relieved of the obligation to spend the next few years managing the relationship between an institution that they treasure and feel responsible for and a group of people that they feel are deeply dishonorable is relief. And, and that's, so Jim Comey will be fine. And I'm, he is not crying in his soup.
In the end, why do you think Trump fired Comey?
Trump fired Jim Comey because the most dangerous thing in the world, if you're Donald Trump, is a person who tells the truth, is dogged, you can't control, and who is as committed as Comey is to the institutional independence of an organization that has the power to investigate you.
The White House came out after Comey was fired and justified it by saying that the FBI was in disarray, they needed new leadership, that he had lost the faith of the rank and file, and that he was a distraction and that he was doing a job poorly. What do you make of those accusations?
So I'm not going to speak for Jim about that. Again, I'm only going to tell you what I know. I can speak for myself about that. It's a proposition that is laughable to anybody who has ever walked through that building with Jim Comey. Jim Comey is a very controversial figure in political Washington. He's a very controversial figure among former Justice Department officials some of whom really don't admire what he did, and current Justice Department officials, for all I know, who really don't admire what he did and how he handled the Clinton email stuff. He is not a controversial figure in the FBI. And when Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that, I don't know what factual basis she had for it, if any, but it is radically and obviously untrue to anyone who knows, who spends time with people from the Bureau and know their relationship with their leadership.
Benjamin Wittes, thank you.